I held my 3-day-old granddaughter in my arms when my son Tyler burst through the hospital door with his wife Jessica, both wearing expressions I'd never seen before. The baby's soft breathing against my chest felt like pure magic, until Tyler's words shattered everything. "She's deaf. We can't raise a damaged child." Jessica nodded firmly beside him. "We gave her up for adoption. Nothing you can do." My world crumbled as I stared at this perfect, beautiful baby, realizing they were throwing her away simply because she couldn't hear. The fluorescent hospital lights buzzed overhead as I struggled to process what I'd just heard. This tiny miracle in my arms, with her perfect pink fingers and peaceful sleeping face, was being labeled as broken by her own parents. "Tyler, please listen to me," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Deaf children can have wonderful, fulfilling lives. There's technology now, sign language, entire communities of support." My son ran his hands through his dark hair, the same gesture he'd made since childhood when stressed. "Mom, you don't understand the financial burden. Special equipment, therapy sessions, specialized schools. Jessica and I have our marketing firm to run, and she's just gotten that promotion at the real estate company." Jessica stepped forward, her manicured nails clicking against her phone case. "We've researched this extensively, Savannah. The social challenges alone are overwhelming. Birthday parties where she can't communicate with other children, school events where we'll need interpreters. It's not fair to any of us." "What about what's fair to her?" I asked, gently touching the baby's tiny ear. "She's your daughter, my granddaughter." Tyler's jaw tightened. "We've already contacted Sunset Adoption Services. They specialize in special needs placements. The family they've selected has experience with disabled children." The word disabled hung in the air like a slap. I stood up slowly, still cradling the baby. "I could help you raise her. I'm only 62. I'm healthy. I have time. The decision is final, Mom." Tyler's voice carried a coldness I'd never heard before. "The paperwork is already in motion." Jessica checked her watch impatiently. "We need to focus on our future. We can try again for a normal baby next year." My heart shattered completely. I looked down at this innocent child who had no idea her parents had already given up on her before her life had truly begun. Without another word, I placed a gentle kiss on her forehead and handed her to the nurse who'd been waiting quietly in the corner. As I gathered my purse and coat, my hands trembling with emotion, I caught sight of Tyler on his phone near the window. "Yes, Mrs. Thompson, we need this completed within 48 hours. The family in Arizona is ready for immediate placement." Arizona, 48 hours. My mind raced as I processed this accidentally overheard information. Jessica had left her adoption agency business card on the bedside table while digging through her purse. Without thinking, I quickly photographed it with my phone when no one was looking. I walked out of that hospital room knowing my son thought this was goodbye forever. But Tyler had no idea that his mother was about to embark on the most important mission of her life. 6 months later, I sat in my first American Sign Language class at Riverside Community College, my notebook filled with sketches of hand positions and facial expressions. The fluorescent classroom lights were different from the harsh hospital ones, warmer somehow, though my heart still ached every time I thought about my granddaughter. Professor Williams, a distinguished woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, moved her hands with such fluid grace that I found myself mesmerized. She'd been born deaf and had dedicated her career to teaching ASL to hearing adults. "Remember, ASL isn't just hand movements," she explained, her voice clear and precise. "It's a complete language with its own grammar, culture, and beauty. Your facial expressions and body language are just as important as your hand signs." I struggled initially, my 63-year-old fingers feeling clumsy and slow compared to my younger classmates. But Professor Williams noticed my dedication. After class one evening, she approached my desk. "Savannah, you have remarkable determination. Most students don't practice 4 hours every night like you do. May I ask what motivates you?" I told her about my granddaughter, about Tyler's abandonment, about my desperate need to be ready to communicate with this child when I found her. Professor Williams listened intently, then shared something that changed everything. "There's a woman I want you to meet, Martha Henderson. She successfully reconnected with her deaf grandson after her daughter gave him up. She might have advice for your search." Martha turned out to be a silver-haired woman in her 70s with laugh lines around her eyes and hands that moved like poetry when she signed. We met at a small coffee shop near the college, where she shared her story over steaming mugs of vanilla latte. My daughter was only 19 when Jacob was born deaf, Martha explained, her hands moving gracefully as she spoke. She was overwhelmed, scared, and convinced she couldn't handle a special needs child. Sound familiar? I nodded, feeling tears prick my eyes. I spent 3 years learning ASL, attending deaf community events, building relationships with social workers and adoption agencies. I learned that the deaf community is incredibly tight-knit and supportive. If you show genuine respect for their culture, they'll help you. Martha introduced me to weekly deaf community gatherings at the local cultural center. Friday evening social hours where deaf adults and their families came together to share meals, play games, and simply enjoy conversation in their natural language. At first, I felt like an outsider, my basic signing skills making me appear childish and fumbling. But the community welcomed me with patience and warmth. I met parents of deaf children who shared resources about educational programs, assistive technology, and advocacy organizations. Through these connections, I learned about adoption search techniques, grandparents' legal rights, and the complex world of interstate adoption laws. I discovered that biological grandparents had limited legal standing, but persistent searching often yielded results. Then came my second breakthrough, this one devastating in its implications. I'd hired a family law attorney, Sarah Collins, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in adoption cases. We met in her downtown office, where she reviewed the paperwork I'd managed to obtain through careful research and some helpful connections in the deaf community. "Savannah, I need to tell you something disturbing about your son's adoption arrangement," Sarah said, her expression grave as she spread documents across her mahogany desk. "What do you mean?" "Sunset Adoption Services charged your son and daughter-in-law a placement fee of $1,500, which is standard. However, they also received a payment of $25,000 from the adoptive family." My blood ran cold. "A payment? This goes beyond standard adoption expenses. Based on these financial records, it appears your son and his wife essentially sold this baby to the highest bidder. That's not only morally reprehensible, it's legally questionable." I felt sick to my stomach. Tyler's rejection of his daughter hadn't just been about avoiding responsibility. He'd profited from giving her away. "This changes everything," Sarah continued. "If we can prove financial incentive was the primary motivation, rather than the child's best interests, we might have grounds to challenge the adoption. And if the adoptive family paid that much, they're either incredibly wealthy or they had specific reasons for wanting a deaf child that may not be entirely altruistic." As I left Sarah's office that afternoon, I realized the true depth of Tyler's betrayal. But I also felt a new surge of determination. My granddaughter wasn't just abandoned, she was sold. And that made me more committed than ever to finding her and ensuring she was truly safe and loved. 1 year after that devastating hospital day, I stood in the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, my heart racing with nervous energy. My ASL skills had progressed to near fluency, and I'd become deeply embedded in the deaf community back home. Through patient networking and careful investigation, I'd traced my granddaughter to a family in suburban Arizona. The Hendricks family lived in a sprawling ranch-style home in Scottsdale, complete with a 3-car garage and a backyard pool surrounded by desert landscaping. I'd spent weeks researching them through social media, public records, and careful observation during my house hunting visits to the neighborhood. From my rental car parked across the street, I watched 2-year-old Hope playing in their backyard. She was absolutely beautiful, with Tyler's dark hair and what appeared to be my late husband's bright green eyes. But something about her play seemed solitary, isolated in a way that made my grandmother's heart ache. David Hendricks, a tall man in his early 40s with graying temples, emerged from the sliding patio door. I watched him attempt to get Hope's attention by waving his arms and pointing toward the house. When she didn't respond immediately, his body language showed clear frustration. He walked over and physically turned her shoulders to face him, then pointed emphatically toward the door. Hope's face scrunched in confusion and what looked like distress. She seemed to be trying to understand what he wanted, but without sign language or proper visual communication techniques, they were both struggling. Rachel Hendricks appeared next, a petite blonde woman who looked overwhelmed as she watched her husband's failed attempts at communication. She said something to David that I couldn't hear, but his responding gesture suggested exasperation. My heart broke watching this beautiful little girl navigate a world where her own parents couldn't communicate with her effectively. The next day, I positioned myself at the local Whole Foods, knowing from my research that Rachel Hendricks shopped there every Tuesday morning. I wore a simple blue cardigan and carried a small sign language dictionary, hoping to appear approachable and professional. When I spotted Rachel in the produce section, comparing organic apples, I took a deep breath and approached her cart. "Excuse me," I said gently. "I couldn't help but notice your beautiful daughter yesterday at the playground. I'm a sign language instructor, and I was wondering if your family might be interested in some lessons?" Rachel's face immediately crumpled, and tears began flowing down her cheeks right there among the fruit displays. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's just been so overwhelming. We adopted Hope 18 months ago, and we thought we were prepared, but we're failing her completely." I handed her a tissue from my purse. "What do you mean?" "We took a few basic sign language classes before the adoption, but it's so much harder than we expected. Hope gets frustrated because we can't understand what she needs, and David gets angry because he feels helpless. We're all miserable." My heart raced, but I kept my voice calm and supportive. Learning ASL is challenging, but it's absolutely achievable with the right guidance. I'd be happy to work with your family. I specialize in helping hearing parents communicate with their deaf children. Rachel's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Really? We tried online courses and DVD programs, but nothing seems to work. Hope is so smart, and I can see her trying to tell us things, but we just don't understand. What I'd like to do is start with basic family signs. Everyday words that will improve your immediate communication while we build toward more complex conversations. How much do you charge?" I pretended to consider this carefully. For families dealing with communication barriers, I often provide initial consultations at no cost. I believe every child deserves to communicate freely with their parents. Rachel broke down completely then, sobbing with relief. "You have no idea how much this means to us. David has been talking about returning Hope to the adoption agency because he says we can't handle her special needs. I love her so much, but I feel like we're failing her every single day." My blood ran cold at the mention of returning Hope to foster care, but I managed to maintain my composed exterior. "When would be a good time for me to meet with your family? Could you come this Saturday? David will be home, and Hope naps in the afternoon, so we could talk freely about her needs and challenges." As I walked back to my rental car that afternoon, my hands were shaking with a mixture of excitement and terror. I'd found my granddaughter, and she was in trouble. The Hendricks family was loving but overwhelmed, and David's mention of returning her meant I had limited time to intervene. But I also realized I was walking into an incredibly complex situation. How long could I maintain this deception? What would happen when they discovered my true identity? And most importantly, how could I protect Hope from being abandoned again? Saturday couldn't come fast enough, but I also dreaded what I might discover about my granddaughter's daily life. Saturday afternoon arrived with Arizona's blazing sunshine beating down on the Hendricks desert landscape. I stood at their front door, my heart hammering against my ribs as I clutched a canvas bag filled with ASL teaching materials I'd carefully prepared. Rachel greeted me with obvious relief, while David offered a firm handshake and a skeptical expression. Hope was playing with wooden blocks in the living room, her back to us as she built elaborate towers with intense concentration. "Hope, sweetie, come meet Miss Savannah," Rachel called out, then turned to me with embarrassment. "She can't hear me calling her name. We usually have to go touch her shoulder to get her attention." I walked over to Hope's play area and gently tapped the floor near her blocks, creating a vibration she could feel. When she looked up, I smiled and waved, then signed hello with an open, friendly expression. Hope's entire face transformed with joy and surprise. She immediately signed back hello and then something much more complex that I recognized as, "You know my language." "She's excited that you can communicate with her," I translated for her parents, my heart swelling with pride at this brilliant little girl. David shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. "We've tried learning signs, but it's like trying to learn Chinese. Our hands just don't move the right way." For the next 2 hours, I worked with the family on basic household signs. More, finished, help, bathroom, hungry, hurt, and I love you. Hope participated enthusiastically, clearly thrilled to have an adult who understood her natural language. What broke my heart was watching her teach her own parents. When David struggled with the sign for water, Hope gently took his large hands in her tiny ones and molded them into the correct position. The love and patience in her gestures reminded me so much of Tyler at that age, when he'd helped me learn new computer programs. She's incredibly intelligent, I told the Hendricks truthfully. Deaf children often develop enhanced visual processing skills. Hope is reading your facial expressions and body language at a much more sophisticated level than typical hearing children her age. Rachel beamed with maternal pride. I knew she was special. She notices everything and remembers where we put things even when we forget. David remained more reserved. But what about school? How will she function in the real world if most people don't know sign language? I spent considerable time explaining cochlear implants, mainstream education with interpreters, deaf schools that provide rich cultural and academic environments, and the thriving deaf professional community. David listened but still seemed overwhelmed by the long-term implications. As the weeks passed, I visited the Hendricks family twice weekly for ASL lessons. Hope and I developed a beautiful relationship, though I had to constantly guard against revealing my true feelings. When she skinned her knee in the backyard and came running to me instead of her parents, signing frantically about her ooey, I nearly broke down with grandmother's instincts. But David's suspicion grew with each visit. He started asking probing questions about my background, my certification, and my unusual knowledge of Hope's specific needs and personality. You seem to understand her better after 6 weeks than we do after 18 months, he observed during one lesson. Where did you train? Who certified you as a deaf education specialist? I provided carefully prepared answers about my community college courses and volunteer work, but David's questions became increasingly specific and challenging. The crisis came during my 8th week of visits. I arrived for our usual Saturday lesson to find David waiting in the living room with a manila folder and a stern expression. "Savannah, we need to talk," he said, gesturing for me to sit across from him while Rachel took Hope outside to play. My stomach dropped as he opened the folder and spread out printed documents. "I hired a private investigator, Don Stevens, to verify your background," David said quietly. Imagine my surprise when he discovered that Savannah Thompson isn't a certified ASL instructor or deaf education specialist. The room felt like it was spinning. "David, I can explain. You're Hope's biological grandmother. Your son Tyler gave her up for adoption, and you've been lying to us for 2 months to gain access to her." There was no point in denial. "Yes, that's true." David's face flushed with anger. "You manipulated us. You exploited our trust and desperation to deceive us about your identity. What else have you lied about? Everything I taught you about ASL is real. Everything I told you about Hope's intelligence and potential is true. I do love her, more than you can possibly understand. You have no right to love her. You have no legal standing here whatsoever." Rachel returned from the backyard, took one look at our faces, and immediately understood something serious was happening. "David, what's wrong? Our ASL instructor is actually Hope's biological grandmother. She's been lying to us since day one." Rachel's face went white. "Is that true?" I nodded miserably. "I'm sorry for deceiving you, but I had to make sure Hope was safe and loved. When I found her, I couldn't just walk away." David stood up and began pacing. "This is exactly the kind of situation our adoption counselor warned us about. Biological family members who can't accept the adoption and try to insert themselves into the child's life. I'm not trying to take her away from you," I said desperately. "I just wanted to be part of her life." "Well, that's not your decision to make." David pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Tyler right now. He needs to know what you've been doing, and come handle this situation immediately." My blood turned to ice. "Please don't involve Tyler. This is between us." "Like hell it is. You violated our trust and potentially compromised our adoption. Tyler told us during the original proceedings that his family wouldn't be a problem, but obviously he was wrong." As David dialed Tyler's number, I realized my careful plan had completely backfired. Not only was I about to be banned from Hope's life, but Tyler's involvement could make everything infinitely worse. I looked through the sliding glass door at Hope, who was happily signing to herself while playing with sidewalk chalk. She had no idea that the adults in her life were about to turn her world upside down once again. 3 days later, I sat in the sterile conference room at Sunset Adoption Services, my hands trembling as Tyler and Jessica entered with their lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named William Patterson, who carried himself like he'd never lost a case. Tyler looked older than his 31 years, with new stress lines around his eyes and a grim expression I'd rarely seen. Jessica wore a tailored business suit and an icy demeanor that made the air conditioning feel unnecessary. David and Rachel Hendricks sat across the table with their own attorney, while Mrs. Thompson, the adoption counselor, presided over this uncomfortable family tribunal. We're here to address the concerning situation regarding biological family interference with the Hendricks Hope placement, Mrs. Thompson began, consulting her thick case file. Tyler stared at me with barely contained anger. Mom, I can't believe you've been lying and manipulating these people for months. What exactly did you think you were going to accomplish? I wanted to make sure my granddaughter was happy and safe, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Jessica leaned forward aggressively. Hope isn't your granddaughter anymore. We terminated our parental rights, and the Hendricks legally adopted her. You have absolutely no standing here. The problem, David Hendricks interjected, is that Savannah misrepresented herself to gain access to our home and our daughter. We feel violated and concerned about what other deceptions might be involved. Tyler's lawyer cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to seek a restraining order if necessary, to prevent further contact between Mrs. Thompson and the child. At that moment, the conference room door opened, and Rachel Hendricks entered with Hope, who'd been waiting in the agency's child-friendly playroom. The little girl immediately spotted me and ran over, signing enthusiastically about the toys she'd been playing with. The room fell silent as everyone watched this beautiful 3-year-old communicate fluently in sign language, her face animated and joyful as she described her morning. Tyler's expression shifted from anger to something more complex as he watched his daughter for the first time since the hospital. Hope was no longer a helpless infant but a vibrant, intelligent child with her own personality and opinions. She's gotten so big, Tyler whispered, almost to himself. Hope noticed Tyler and tilted her head curiously, studying his face. Then she signed to me, "Who is that man? Why does he look sad?" I found myself in an impossible position. Before I could figure out how to respond, Mrs. Thompson interrupted with a revelation that changed everything. Before we continue this discussion, I need to share some recent developments regarding this adoption case. She pulled out a different folder, much thicker than the first one. We've been conducting a routine post-placement review of the Hendricks family, as required by Arizona state law for special needs adoptions. During this review, several concerning issues have emerged. David Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. What kind of issues? First, the adoption agreement specifically required that Hope be provided with appropriate language access and cultural connections to the deaf community. Our social workers' visits documented that no sign language instruction was provided until Mrs. Savannah Thompson began her unofficial tutoring. Rachel looked embarrassed. We tried online courses, but they were too difficult. Second, and more seriously, we've discovered irregularities in the financial arrangements surrounding this adoption. Tyler's face went pale. What do you mean? Mrs. Thompson spread out financial documents across the conference table. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, you received $25,000 from the Hendricks family beyond standard adoption fees. This payment appears to constitute compensation for the child, rather than reimbursement for medical and legal expenses. Jessica's lawyer began shuffling papers frantically. Those were legitimate adoption-related costs. $25,000. For what, specifically? Mrs. Thompson asked pointedly. Medical bills were covered by insurance. Legal fees were less than $3,000. What service or expense justified this additional payment? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Tyler finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Jessica said it was compensation for the emotional trauma and lost time from work. That's called baby selling, Mr. Williams, and it's illegal in every state, Mrs. Thompson replied firmly. Hope, sensing the tension in the room, moved closer to me and signed. Everyone seems angry. Are you okay, Grandma Lady? Tyler's sharp intake of breath told me he'd understood at least part of what she'd signed. He stared at his daughter with growing realization. She called you Grandma, he said quietly. Mrs. Thompson continued her bombshell revelations. Based on these findings, the state of Arizona is reviewing this adoption for potential violations of interstate adoption laws. If the placement was motivated primarily by financial gain rather than the child's best interests, the adoption could be voided. David Hendricks exploded. You can't be serious. We've raised Hope for 2 years. We love her. Mr. Hendricks, your family has also violated several terms of your adoption agreement. Beyond the language access issues, our investigators discovered that you contacted the original adoption agency 3 times in the past 6 months, inquiring about returning Hope, due to her special needs being more challenging than expected. Rachel began crying. We were just overwhelmed. We never actually intended to give her back. The recorded phone conversations suggest otherwise, Mrs. Thompson replied firmly. Tyler suddenly stood up and walked around the table to where Hope was sitting next to me. He knelt down to her eye level, and she studied his face with curious attention. Very slowly and carefully, Tyler signed hello, one of the few signs he'd apparently learned since our hospital confrontation. Hope's face lit up with delighted surprise, and she signed back, "Hello, you know some of my language too." For the first time in 3 years, Tyler truly saw his daughter as a complete, intelligent, communicative person, rather than a burden or problem to be solved. The room watched in stunned silence as father and daughter had their first real conversation, however limited by Tyler's basic signing skills. Mrs. Thompson cleared her throat. Given the legal violations, financial irregularities, and failure to meet adoption agreement terms, this case is being transferred to family court for full review. All parties should prepare for extensive legal proceedings. As we left the adoption agency that afternoon, I realized everything was about to change again. But for the first time since that devastating hospital day, I felt hopeful that justice might finally be served. The family court hearing took place 6 weeks later in a wood-paneled courtroom that smelled like old law books and nervous sweat. Judge Margaret Foster, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, presided over the case that would determine Hope's future. I sat in the gallery behind Sarah Collins, my attorney, watching as the complex web of lies and financial manipulation slowly unraveled before the court. The Hendricks family testified first, and their honesty was both refreshing and damaging to their case. "Your Honor," David Hendricks said from the witness stand, "we went into this adoption with the best intentions, but we were completely unprepared for the reality of raising a deaf child. We thought love would be enough." "Can you elaborate on your preparedness?" Sarah Collins asked during cross-examination. David's shoulders sagged. "We took a weekend sign language workshop and watched some YouTube videos. We assumed Hope would get a cochlear implant and learn to speak normally. When the doctors said she wasn't a good candidate for the implant, we panicked. Is it true that you contacted Sunset Adoption Services multiple times asking about reversing the adoption?" "Yes," David admitted quietly, "but we never followed through. We were just scared and overwhelmed." Rachel Hendricks testified next, tears streaming down her face as she admitted their failures. "I love Hope deeply, but I failed her as a mother. She needs parents who can communicate with her naturally, who understand deaf culture, who can prepare her for the challenges she'll face. We adopted her thinking we could fix her deafness, not celebrate it." The financial investigation revealed even more disturbing details than I'd initially known. Tyler and Jessica had not only received the $25,000 payment, but had also lied on their financial disclosure forms, claiming significant debt they didn't actually have to justify the large payment. When Tyler took the stand, I barely recognized my son. He looked haggard, older, and deeply ashamed. "Mr. Williams," Judge Foster asked directly, "can you explain to this court why you accepted money for your daughter?" Tyler's voice cracked as he answered, "I was scared, Your Honor. When we learned Hope was deaf, I panicked about the costs and challenges. Jessica researched it and found families willing to pay extra for healthy infants, even special needs ones. At the time, it seemed like everyone won. Did you consider what was best for Hope?" "No, ma'am. I considered what was easiest for us. I was selfish and cowardly, and I've regretted it every day since." The courtroom was silent as Tyler continued his testimony. Watching Hope communicate with my mother these past few months, seeing how intelligent and happy she is when people speak her language, I realized what I threw away. Not just my daughter, but the chance to grow as a person, to learn something new, to love someone unconditionally, regardless of their differences. Jessica's testimony was far less sympathetic. She maintained that they'd done nothing wrong, that the adoption was legitimate, and that Hope was better off with the Hendricks family than with an elderly woman who has no legal rights. Her coldness and lack of remorse clearly affected Judge Foster, who asked pointed questions about Jessica's motivations and continued lack of interest in her biological daughter. When I testified, I shared the entire story. My immediate love for Hope, the devastating hospital confrontation, my years of learning ASL and connecting with the deaf community, my desperate search for my granddaughter, and my deception of the Hendricks family. "Mrs. Thompson," Judge Foster asked, "what do you hope to gain from these proceedings?" Your Honor, I want Hope to be with a family who celebrates her exactly as she is. If that's the Hendricks family after they receive proper education and support, I'll accept that. If it's me, I'm prepared to provide the love, language, access, and cultural connections she needs. I just want her to be truly wanted and valued. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, a family therapist who'd been appointed to evaluate everyone involved. She'd spent hours with Hope, observing her interactions with each potential guardian. Your Honor, Hope is a remarkably resilient and intelligent child who has adapted well despite inconsistent communication access. However, she clearly thrives in environments where she can communicate naturally in ASL. Can you elaborate on your observations? Hope's behavior and emotional regulation are significantly better during visits with Mrs. Thompson than during interactions with either the Hendricks family or her biological parents. This isn't necessarily about love or care, but about communication, access, and cultural understanding. Dr. Rodriguez continued with recommendations that surprised everyone in the courtroom. I believe Hope's best interests would be served by placement with Mrs. Thompson as primary guardian, with structured visitation for Mr. Williams as he continues learning ASL and addressing his personal issues. The Hendricks family, while loving, lacks the cultural and linguistic foundation Hope needs for optimal development. Tyler's reaction to this recommendation shocked everyone, including me. He stood up in the gallery and addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, I support that recommendation completely. My mother is the only person in this courtroom who has consistently put Hope's needs first. I want to rebuild my relationship with my daughter, but she deserves to be with someone who loves her unconditionally right now. Jessica's sharp intake of breath told me this was the first she'd heard of Tyler's change of heart. Judge Foster called a recess, and during the break, I witnessed the final twist in this long journey. Tyler approached me in the courthouse hallway, his face filled with remorse and determination. Mom, I need to tell you something. Jessica gave me an ultimatum last night. Either I support her appeal of this court case and try to regain custody of Hope for another adoption attempt, or she files for divorce. What did you tell her? I told her to call her lawyer. I'm choosing my daughter this time. Behind Tyler, I could see Jessica in heated conversation with her attorney, her face flushed with anger and disbelief that her husband had finally chosen his child over their marriage. Tyler, are you sure? I've spent 3 years running from the biggest mistake of my life. Watching Hope communicate with you, seeing how happy and confident she becomes when someone actually speaks her language, I realized I didn't lose a daughter to deafness. I lost her to my own fear and prejudice. Judge Foster returned with a decision that would change all our lives forever. After careful consideration of all testimony, financial records, and expert recommendations, this court finds that the original adoption was tainted by illegal financial incentives and failure to meet the child's special needs requirements. The courtroom held its collective breath. The adoption is hereby voided, and custody is awarded to Mrs. Savannah Thompson, with supervised visitation rights for Mr. H.N. Tyler Williams, as he demonstrates continued commitment to learning ASL and participating in family therapy. Hope, who had been coloring quietly with a court advocate, looked up at the commotion and signed to me. Are we going home together now, Grandma? I signed back. Yes, sweetheart, we're going home together. Tyler, watching our exchange, signed his first complete sentence to his daughter. I love you, Hope. I'm sorry I left you. Hope considered this carefully, then signed back. It's okay, Daddy. Grandma taught me that people can learn new things when they're ready. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, including mine. 2 years have passed since that life-changing day in family court, and as I write this story, I'm watching Hope practice her violin in our sunlit living room. She's now 6 years old, confident, bilingual in ASL and English, and absolutely thriving in every possible way. Our home has become a haven of communication and love. Hope attends the excellent deaf school across town 3 days a week, where she's surrounded by deaf teachers and classmates who share her natural language. The other 2 days, she's in a mainstream kindergarten class with a skilled interpreter, building bridges between deaf and hearing worlds. The transformation in all of us has been remarkable, but perhaps most dramatic in Tyler. My son spent the first 6 months after the court decision in intensive therapy with Dr. Rodriguez, working through his fears, prejudices, and the shame of abandoning his daughter. He threw himself into ASL classes with the same intensity I'd had during my search, practicing for hours every evening until his hands moved with increasing fluency. Tyler's visitation started with supervised 2-hour sessions at the family court center. I'll never forget Hope's cautious curiosity during those early visits, watching this man who claimed to be her father struggle to communicate basic concepts in her language. But children are incredibly forgiving when they see genuine effort and love. The breakthrough came during Tyler's 4th month of visits. Hope had been frustrated about a playground conflict at school, and she was signing rapidly about another child who'd been mean to her during recess. Tyler, instead of asking me to translate, took his time and signed back his own response. "That sounds really frustrating," he managed, his signs still careful and deliberate. "Did you tell your teacher what happened?" Hope's face lit up with surprise and joy that her daddy had actually understood and responded to her directly. She launched into an enthusiastic explanation of how she'd handled the situation, and Tyler listened intently, asking follow-up questions and praising her problem-solving skills. That was the moment I knew my son had truly found his way back to his daughter. Tyler's divorce from Jessica was finalized 8 months after the court case. Jessica never showed any interest in rebuilding a relationship with Hope and has since relocated to California for a fresh start. While this saddens me for Hope's sake, I've come to understand that not every biological parent is meant to be an actual parent. The Hendricks family surprised everyone by requesting to stay in touch with Hope. After the initial shock and disappointment of losing the adoption, they realized their love for her was genuine, even if they'd been unprepared for her needs. They attended family counseling with Dr. Rodriguez and eventually asked if they could maintain a friendship role in Hope's life. Hope now has what she calls her Arizona grandparents, and David and Rachel have become enthusiastic advocates for deaf children in their community. They volunteer with local deaf organizations and have helped other families navigate the early stages of raising deaf children. Their growth has been beautiful to witness. Today, as I watch Hope practice her violin, something she chose to pursue, because she loves feeling the vibrations through the instrument, I'm filled with gratitude for this extraordinary journey that brought us together. Tyler arrives every Saturday morning for his overnight visit, and Hope runs to greet him with excited signing about her week. They have developed their own father-daughter traditions, cooking breakfast together while discussing everything from school projects to friendship challenges, attending deaf community events where Tyler continues learning about Hope's culture, and working on a garden in my backyard where they plant vegetables and flowers while practicing new vocabulary. Last month, Tyler started dating someone new. Amanda is a hearing woman who works as an ASL interpreter at the local hospital. She learned sign language in college because her younger brother was born deaf, so she understands the beauty and complexity of deaf culture from the beginning. Hope adores her and has started teaching Amanda new slang signs that kids at deaf school have invented. My own life has been transformed in ways I never expected. I've become an advocate for grandparents' rights in adoption cases and frequently speak at legal conferences about the importance of considering extended family in placement decisions. I also volunteer with the state's Adoption Review Board, helping ensure that special needs children are placed with families who are truly prepared for their unique requirements. But the most meaningful part of my new life is simply being Hope's grandmother. Every morning, she wakes up knowing she's completely loved and accepted exactly as she is. She's learning that being deaf isn't something to overcome or fix, it's simply part of who she is, like having brown hair or green eyes. Hope has taught me that communication is about so much more than hearing and speaking. She reads facial expressions like poetry, notices visual details that hearing people miss, and expresses emotions with her whole body in ways that are incredibly beautiful and nuanced. When she tells me about her day, her hands dance through stories about art class, recess adventures, and friendship dramas. When she's excited about something, her entire face lights up and her signs become more animated and expressive. When she's tired, she snuggles against me, and we communicate through gentle touches and shared silence. Recently, Hope asked me why her first parents gave her away. It's a conversation I've been preparing for since she came to live with me. I explained it simply and honestly. Sometimes adults make decisions based on fear instead of love. Your daddy was scared because he didn't know how to talk with you, and he thought being deaf meant you couldn't have a happy life. But he was wrong, and now he knows better. "Are you scared of anything, Grandma?" she asked, her small hands forming the signs with typical 6-year-old curiosity. I thought about this carefully before responding. I used to be scared that I wouldn't be able to find you and take care of you. Now I'm only scared of not being the grandmother you deserve. Hope considered this seriously, then signed with the wisdom that children sometimes possess. "You don't have to be perfect, Grandma. You just have to love me and believe I can do anything." That conversation happened 3 months ago, and her words still take my breath away. As I finish writing this story, Hope has put down her violin and is asking if we can bake cookies for Tyler's visit tomorrow. She's excited to show him a new song she's learned, and she wants to surprise him with his favorite chocolate chip cookies. I've learned that the greatest gift we can give anyone, especially children, is simply seeing them for who they truly are and believing in their unlimited potential. My granddaughter was never damaged or broken. She was perfect exactly as she was, with a brilliant mind, a loving heart, and simply a different way of experiencing the world. Sometimes the most beautiful conversations happen without any sound at all. Tyler has learned this too. Last week, he told me that Hope has made him a better person in ways he's still discovering. "She's taught me that love means learning someone else's language instead of forcing them to learn yours," he said. "I spent 3 years thinking I couldn't handle a deaf daughter, when the truth was I just needed to become the kind of father she deserved." The ripple effects of our journey continue to spread. Tyler now volunteers with a local organization that provides support for fathers of special needs children. He shares his story honestly, including his initial rejection and the long path back to his daughter, hoping to help other parents avoid the mistakes he made. I've been contacted by dozens of grandparents in similar situations, families torn apart by fear, prejudice, or simple lack of understanding about disabilities. Each story reminds me that love truly can conquer fear, but only when we're willing to do the hard work of growing and changing. Hope will always know that she survived 2 abandonments and emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more resilient because of it. But more importantly, she'll know that she deserves unconditional love and that her differences make her remarkable, not damaged. Our family looks different than I ever expected. We communicate in multiple languages, we navigate deaf and hearing worlds with equal comfort, and we've learned that the strongest bonds are built through patience, understanding, and genuine acceptance. Hope is now fluent in ASL, increasingly skilled in written English, and learning to navigate the hearing world with confidence and pride in her deaf identity. She wants to become either a veterinarian or a teacher when she grows up, and I have no doubt she'll achieve whatever dreams she sets her mind to. As the sun sets outside our window, and Hope settles in for bedtime stories told entirely in sign language, I'm filled with overwhelming gratitude for the journey that brought us here. I learned that real love isn't about fixing people or making them fit our expectations. True love means accepting and celebrating differences, learning their language instead of forcing them to learn ours, and believing in someone's potential even when they can't see it themselves. My granddaughter taught me that the most profound conversations often happen in silence, that strength comes in many forms, and that family isn't just about blood relationships, it's about who shows up, who stays, and who loves you, exactly as you are. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is simply seeing them for who they truly are and believing in their unlimited potential. This story could have had a tragic ending. Instead, it became a testament to the transformative power of love, persistence, and the willingness to change. Every time Hope signs "I love you," Grandma, as we say goodnight, I'm reminded that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth learning new languages for, and worth never giving up on. That's the lesson I want to leave with anyone who hears this story. Never underestimate the power of one person's determination to love unconditionally. Sometimes that determination can change everything. Have you ever had to learn a completely new way of communicating to connect with someone you love? I'd love to hear your stories about overcoming language barriers, whether they're literal languages, generational differences, or simply learning to understand someone's unique way of seeing the world. Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about families who've overcome incredible challenges through love and persistence. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that differences make us stronger, not weaker. Thank you for taking this journey with me and Hope. I hope our story reminds you that every child deserves to be celebrated exactly as they are, and that it's never too late to learn new ways of showing love. Until next time, remember that the most beautiful conversations sometimes happen without any words at all.